I'm here with Pieri Munro, the interim CEO of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Kia ora, Pieri, and thank you for your time today.
Kia ora.
You've been in the role during probably the worst natural disaster in Hawke's Bay. Can you give me an overview of the damage and destruction caused by Cyclone Gabrielle?
An overview. Probably the worst that we've ever suffered in recorded history. People have tried to make comparisons with Bola, but this, we believe, has significantly impacted Hawke's Bay. In particular areas, it's been variable as to where it's impacted. So like if you look at Napier City, where we're currently sited here, minimal impacts. But if you go a wee bit further south, down towards Rissington, down Puketapu, Puketitiri, up into the Esk Valley, up into Moyo, significant impacts. Pākowhai is another one. So it's been in particular areas where there's been devastation and quite severe. You know, we're talking about people, property, and about businesses.
Now, obviously, the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group handled the initial response, and there's a review into that. How do you think the response was?
I think so if we talk about the response, but we talk about the circumstance around that, a bit of context.
Yeah.
So on the 12th, the 13th, leading into the 14th, we certainly had some forecast information. And this exceeded all the forecast information and modelling and prediction that we were able to do off the top of that. I think an example of that is that in one of the areas where we were forecast for about 250, it topped out at about 501. And that's off our Glengarry site, one of our monitoring sites that we use for the Esk Valley area. So the forecast information we got, we did the best that we could in terms of modelling and predicting off that and responding in terms of certain actions to that. But the cyclone that we experienced on the night of the 13th and the 14th was somewhat different to that. So in terms of the response to that, I think our staff, both at the Civil Defence Headquarters, where we had lost cell phone networks, we had lost power, we had lost communications, I think did the level best. That said, we're well aware and we invite a review and an inquiry in terms of not only civil defence, and that's been processed at the moment, but also one that might be higher, and we're reliant upon ministers and upon government in terms of that.
When did you start getting information that it was much worse than you thought it was going to be?
Well, my understanding was that it actually changed to a red alert, but the actual forecast information itself hadn't changed. That was on the night of the 13th,
yeah.
Leading to that. I think when we first got the alert was in the early morning of the 14th, when the rain had started to exceed what those predictions and that modelling had been telling us.
So what was your first course of action as CEO?
Well, our first course of action was to be in terms of the states of declaration that were given not only by Napier, but also by Hastings and also by regional. And then we had the national declaration state of emergency that came out as well. My role initially as CE was to stand up our initial responses to that. That was to ensure we have administrative responsibility for Hawke's Bay Civil Defence.
Yeah.
And so our role was to ensure that we had sufficient staff in there, both before, leading up to and through, and in the post-response areas. Also to stand up our own emergency operations centre here in terms of looking after our response on the ground, but also our BAU, our business as usual.
And what is the recovery, and what have you done as a council? Once again, overview kind of thing, because there's so much to talk about, I suppose. Yeah.
So earlier on I mentioned people, property, businesses.
Yeah.
That's our priority structure in terms of how we approach that. So we have 248 kilometres of stock bank. That's our primary across the Heretaunga Plains. We had about 5.3 of that was breached in terms of a cumulative aggregated distance of stock bank. We had about 23 kilometres of that were damaged in some way. So in terms of people's safety, our first response is to try and get that back to as it was. That's going to take us a whole year to get there. We normally have probably about 50 staff who have different maintenance jobs around that. We've got 170 staff. That includes contractors, includes people from outside who were brought in We're running 17 teams across that to get those built back to as they were as quickly as possible.
And so, I mean, where do you even start with the cleanup? I mean, how did you prioritise that?
Well, the priority was around people, property, and then around businesses.
Yeah.
And that's about people's safety first and foremost.
Yeah.
So our one is the people that have been affected, those who might not have been affected on the fringes, they're concerned about their ongoing safety.
Yeah.
I've heard from others about how some are feeling quite anxious when it rains. And the rain's going to continue as we move into winter. So our first priority is about getting those stock banks up and running properly.
Yeah.
That's taken most of our resource at the moment. It's taken significant cost over and above what our regional council covers. So we're working closely with central government and with the recovery agency that has been set up to ensure that we can do that fast, and then we can move on in terms of other areas, whether that's about silt removal or other aspects.